Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this, podcast number 55 and number 16 in my second season. Thanks for joining me for this wonderful conversation. And on today's episode, I've got a great one with George Hattendorf, retired Director of Bands and Fine Arts Chairman at Mountain Ridge High School in Phoenix, Arizona. Many of you may remember George from his days at Chesterton High School in Indiana, or from his time at Vandercook College of Music or New Mexico State University. George has had a great career, and like many of us in the field, is remaining active as a clinician, adjudicator, conductor, and as an adjunct faculty member at Glendale Community College in Glendale, Arizona. George has some wonderful stories and recollections of his years in the business, and I will bring that conversation to you right after I thank my sponsors who make this podcast possible. Let me begin by giving a big shout out to the Eastman Music Company, makers of Eastman Winds, Eastman Strings, Eastman Guitars, William S. Haynes Flutes, S.E. Shires Brass Instruments, Bakun Musical Services, and Bourgeois Guitars. And I can tell you that I recently got a Shires Destino model trumpet. That's the Doc Severinsen model, the Destino, and I absolutely love it. It has a big, dark sound, and the response is simply fantastic. So the next time you're in your favorite music store, check out the Shires trumpets and trombones and brass instruments and all the other great instruments from the Eastman Music Company. Thanks to my buddy Kevin Lepper and his Advantage Network Percussion Company. Kevin is the perfect guy to contact for your fall marching band needs. Shoes, sticks, drum heads, and so much more, all at great prices and the best service you'll ever get. To Vandercook College of Music, home of the most practical and comprehensive music education you will receive. Great degree programs at the bachelor and master's level, and the most extensive continuing education program to be found anywhere. Visit vandercook.edu, take a class, and make your teaching come alive. Thanks to Hal Leonard, publisher of the Essential Elements Method for Band and the Essential Elements interactive website that is free for all Essential Elements users. I can tell you from firsthand experience, nobody cares more about the quality of their product than the folks at Hal Leonard, the largest print music publisher in the world. And finally, thanks to my friends at thepodcastingstore.com. And here to tell you a little bit about what's going on is Drew Holmes from thepodcastingstore.com.
This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning, and a proud sponsor of Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Listen to what we've been working on in this clip from our podcast.
I wanted to talk about something a little different today. If you only know me from the podcasting store, then you're only getting part of the story. The podcasting store is our electronics and broadcast equipment part of the company, but the other company that we have is Boomer Music Company here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And as part of what we do with that, which is all band and orchestra, I've been volunteering lately at a middle school with their beginners and saw that there was a really big need for reinforcing the basic lessons. So over on the Boomer Music Company YouTube channel, we have created a series of absolute beginners videos. These are short videos that reinforce what the beginner has already learned in class, but may not have fully absorbed. And the goal is to minimize lost practice time between classes so the player can maintain enthusiasm and learn faster. And so the first couple of lessons are going to involve things like opening the case, assembling the instrument, lubrication, and stuff like that. So we're adding more videos to that series all the time, but this could be a valuable resource for those of you who are teaching beginners. So go to the Boomer Music Company YouTube channel. Please subscribe, of course, and check that out. And if that could be of value to you, please use them in whatever way you see fit.
Please visit thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning. This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com. Now back to Charlie.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak with a friend of mine, great band director, Jim Yarnell, who teaches at the American School in The Hague. And after that conversation, a couple of days later, I got this wonderful message from our guest today. And it's a guy that I've known since I was first started teaching, I believe. I think our paths crossed. And he's just a great band director. And I go like, man, I got to get this guy on the podcast. So I reached out to him, and he's been gracious enough to say, yeah, I'll chat with you. And he is Mr. George Hattendorf, who I guess you're now retired. Is it retired George Hattendorf? Is that right, George?
Well, sort of. Yeah, it's sort of from the standpoint of, I'm not in the public school system, but I am doing some work in the community college system now.
Oh, that's
just
cool.
As adjunct faculty.
Yeah, well, I first met George when you were at Chesterton, but my favorite story is the last time we spent any time together. It was a spring day, and I was coming over from Vandercook to come over and work with your band a little bit. And I'm driving across the Chicago Skyway. And if anybody has ever been on the Skyway, they know that sometimes the weather there can be the weirdest stuff in the world. And it was one of those lake effect snows, and it was an absolute blizzard. I mean, there was like 8 or 10 inches of snow on the road, and I thought, I'm never going to get there. And then about 15 miles later, it was sunshine and roses. And I showed up, and I remember having a great time working with your band. You remember that, George?
I do. I suspect it was probably somewhere in that 90s area, the 1990s when I was there. And those lake effect snows, boy, they can they can put a real crimp in your style quite easily.
Oh man, no kidding. Well, a lot has passed in both of our lives since that, but today we're going to talk about you, George, and we're going to talk a little bit about your journey. And I want to get people to get to know you, because you've had quite a ride, and you've done some wonderful things in our profession, and it sounds like you're continuing to do that at the community college level. But before we get into all that, tell us where you grew up and how you got involved in music.
Well, I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, to be specific, Park Forest. Park Forest was one of those suburban communities that sprung up after the Second World War. And there were an awful lot of veterans and veteran families that relocated from the city proper. My grandparents were still in Chicago proper, but a lot of back then, the younger couples went ahead and moved out to the suburbs, and Park Forest being one of those. My musical journey started just like any other kid in the middle school. I started in 5th grade, went to a middle school program, went to a high school program, and then just continued, on from there. Some interesting tidbits about my middle school. Those of us that have been involved in music, whether you're an educator or not, if you're a student, those directors form some real important relationships with you, and those memories are niched in our brains forever and ever. So it's very easy for me to say Mr. Czak, who was my middle school band director, who of all things happened to be a violist. And he was teaching middle school, and was quite a wonderful resource for me. Later on in my high school career as I continued to move down the music road and become more and more interested in that pathway. I ended up playing in a community orchestra as a high school senior with Mr. Cizak, sawing away on his viola. So in the Park Forest area, music was very well accepted. The programs were, let's say, very, very stable and so forth. And so it was a great place for me to start my musical journey.
You ever notice that we always call our former teachers Mr. or Mrs. or Miss?
Exactly.
We never call them by their first name. They never had a first name, you know?
Well, he did. His first name was George, but he's still Mr. Cizak even to this day.
Absolutely. So from there, then you're a percussionist, obviously, right?
Yes.
I say obviously. To me, it's a percussionist, but for our listeners, you started on percussion, or did you make the switch? Or
no, I started on percussion. I was one of those. Now I'm convinced that I was an ADHD kid because if some object was stationary, my hands were moving on it, whether it be a steering wheel later on in life or whether it be a tabletop. My funny story from being a youngster is I had problems learning the double stroke roll with snare drum sticks. Well, I was at home and I had two normal table knives. And of course, I grabbed them like snare drum sticks on the counter and started playing. And whoa, this is how you play a double stroke roll. Bam, connection was made.
Wow, I got a whole new line of drumsticks now.
Yeah, you got it.
Oneida, China.
Yeah.
So you graduate high school, and what made you choose Indiana University?
Well, actually, my high school experience was a wonderful experience. I was in band in my last 2 years, junior year and senior year. I was also in choir. I sang in the choir because I sang in the church choir, and I had some other friends that were in the choir. And so I decided, hey, I want to do that. But my high school program was what we would consider well-rounded. Of course, there was a marching band, but back then in the 60s, marching bands were not doing what they do nowadays. So it was basically just, football games. We had a wonderful concert band setting. We had jazz bands. So we had the whole thing there. But what ended up happening for me, or to me, is that starting in that middle school experience in seventh grade, I went ahead and attended the Illinois Summer Youth Music Program that was held down at the University of Illinois. And that was just a wonderful experience for me. So I started in seventh grade and I went all the way through high school. Every single year I was down in Champaign for that. In my last 2 years in high school, I actually worked. I was a staff member for the camp. Being a percussionist, you can imagine what I did. I was a schlepper. So it was get, this piece of equipment over to this room and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as part of that, I continue to grow closer and closer to the staff members there. And the individual who was in charge of percussion at the music camp was a gentleman by the name of Hugh Sebbing. Hugh was the percussion instructor at Quincy College. And my remembrance of Mr. Sebbing is very simple. First of all, he was a Korean War vet. He was confined to a wheelchair, and he smoked Camel cigarettes like there was no tomorrow. But I distinctly remember the time and the moment when Mr. Sebbing and I was wheeling him back to his dorm room from a rehearsal, because we were both situated in the same area of the dorm. And he asked me, "Hey, George, what are your plans? What is it that you want to do?" This was my junior year. And I said, "Well, I'm really very interested in pursuing a degree in music, and I'm interested in being an orchestral percussionist, because I had really taken a tremendous liking to that." And he had suggested at that point in time, well, if you're interested, he knew that I was an Illinois resident, and the logical thing would be, well, you should probably go to, University of Illinois. And he said, well, if you're really interested in orchestras, you need to go to this school because they have about 8 orchestras. And it happened to be Indiana University. And from there, I went ahead and looked at that. That decision was only reaffirmed more in my last year of high school, my senior year in high school, because I had some what I consider monumental activities that I was involved in that senior year that we can talk about later. But it was his recommendation that pointed me to Indiana. I didn't know anything about it. I kind of knew where it was. And then I started to look at things seriously the beginning of my senior year. And then, the rest of that is history.
So when you went to Indiana, you marched in the band. Was Ray Kramer the marching band director at the time?
Actually, my funny story there, I have a lot of funny stories. Ray and I were freshmen. I was a freshman in the band, and Mr. Kramer was a freshman. It was his first year at Indiana. He was the associate director to Fred Ebbs, who is a famous name in Midwesternese, and both Mr. Kramer and Wilbur England were both freshmen the same year as myself. So yes, I was in the band, and Mr. Kramer at that point in time was not the sole director of the marching band, but he was slowly taking it over.
And Wilbur England was the percussion instructor, and he actually came from Northern Michigan University, didn't he?
He did. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, because I remember as a kid, we'd go to summer band camp at Northern Michigan University, and he was always there, and he had a little group that he would run. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So what are your biggest takeaways when you look back from your IU days?
Well, probably the single greatest thing is just the performance opportunities that I had. I ended up, my parents, God bless them, said, you really need to think about just not getting this music performance degree. Maybe you need to think about, adding, something to that as a fallback.
Yeah.
So I double majored in performance and music ed. As a high school student, I taught privately. I taught young kids. So the teaching thing was not something that was at all foreign to me. But the major takeaways were all the performance opportunities that I had at Indiana, not only within the band, but also most definitely the orchestral situation. I played operas. I played the Nutcracker 3 years in a row, with the ballet company there. Played in the top orchestra, which was the Philharmonic, starting my sophomore year, which was really unheard of. There's 2 of us that were in that top orchestra because it was primarily grad students throughout, in the wind and the string section. I've got a chance to play some jazz things, just a myriad of things. Got to play some weird piece of music that I ended up dropping bottles into a tub so that they would crash and make some kind of sound. I remember that. So just all the performance opportunities that I tried to really aggressively take advantage of was that. Plus the connections that I made. There are 2 names that come to mind. One of my things that I like to brag a little bit about is that I was Peter Erskine's drum or section leader. And I also got to play gigs with John Clayton, if you're familiar with John Clayton,
Sure.
The bassist. And I actually had John come up to my first teaching gig as part of the jazz concert to go ahead and play a little bit of string bass and so forth. So some wonderful connections with people, outstanding educators, teachers down there. So it was just an incredible experience for me.
And you graduate from there and you find your first teaching job at
Highland High School in Highland, Indiana.
And that had to be a shock for you.
Well, let me set that whole thing up, how that worked. Um, I went ahead in my student teaching, because of the fact that I had housing in Bloomington, but I didn't have housing, anywhere else. The normal place for a lot of people to go was either to go south towards Terre Haute or to go into the Indianapolis area. And that just was not going to work, or even further north. So what I did is I went ahead and with the help of faculty, I had them check out some places that would be in far northwest Indiana, so that I could go ahead and go back home in Park Forest and just commute to my student teaching on a daily basis. And they came up with Crown Point High School, which is basically across the state line. So it wasn't a very long commute, maybe 30 minutes, for me to get from home to Crown Point. And I had no inkling of what Crown Point was like. I understand that the director there was Mr. Al Castronovo. And I just went there and, started the student teaching thing. He had such an impact on me that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, that I ended up foregoing a free ride for my master's at Indiana so that I could go ahead and teach, because he had ignited that flame within me about teaching, and I just wanted to pursue it.
That's an awesome story, because I was wondering how you got introduced to Al, because you taught from Highland, then he had gone from Crown Point to Chesterton, then, correct?
Exactly, that same year. And Al was the one that said, hey, I hear there's a job open in Highland. Why don't you go ahead and start there? And then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, yeah, I remember Al. Al was a dear friend of mine along the way. I had my my high school band and the Great Bands of the Orange competition. There was an old thing with Beatrice and the Music Bowl and all that sort of stuff. And we were down in Miami. And at that time, I really hadn't met Al, but he was in the stands, and he introduced himself to my wife, and one thing led to another. We became great friends. But tell us what you remember of Al Castronovo.
A short, fiery Sicilian who played accordion and played flute and attended Vandercook College.
Yeah.
And was an inspirational teacher and a masterful organizer. If besides the music elements that he was able to pass along to me, the primary thing that he really embedded in my head was the how important it is for educators to be organized, especially band directors, in terms of what it is that they're trying to achieve and so forth.
He had that 3-ring binder. Every day he had his page, and he would write down all the things he needed to do that day, and he would categorize them A, B, and C, and then number them 1, 2, and 3. Remember that?
Right.
Oh God, he turned me on to that, man. It was the greatest system I ever had in my life. Yeah. Well, recently, as I mentioned earlier, I connected with one of your old colleagues from the Chesterton days, Jim Yarnell, and you said it brought back a lot of memories for you. What are some of those memories of those days when Jim was there and you were there and Al was there?
Well, the way that this worked out is that when I was student teaching, Jim was a student. He was a student at Crown Point High School. So I actually student taught James Yarnell.
Okay.
And then after that experience, I went ahead and went into the teaching profession. Jim went ahead and went to Ball State University, and he described all of his experiences down there and so forth. And then after that, Jim went ahead and entered the teaching profession at a town called Kankakee, or the school district was the Kankakee Valley, which was not too far from Chesterton. So Jim and I became teaching colleagues, as it were. And then, as you pointed out, he ended up replacing me when I left Chesterton for the first time.
Yeah, you left the first time and you took actually you went to Vandercook and you taught at Vandercook for a while and but then you ended back up in Chesterton.
Right.
How
Well,
did because you were at
the-
you were at what, Stevenson High School before that up in Lincolnwood?
I was, but the actual how things worked out, which is really kind of interesting, is towards the end of my first tenure at Chesterton, I was a student at Vandercook. At that particular point in time in the state of Indiana, teachers were required, not suggested, but were required by their seventh year of teaching to have secured their master's. And so I was kind of in a situation that I had to get started. That again is where Al came in, and he strongly suggested, "Hey, George, you really need to think about going to Vandercook. Not only because of the quality of the program there, but because of, hey, you can go to school and you can still do your job because the way that they have things scheduled there." So, I started my master's doing the Saturday classes.
You're aging yourself now.
I know.
Okay.
Even during the marching season. So I'd go run into Chicago, do my morning class or early afternoon class. I'd run back to Chesterton, hop on the yellow cheese bus, and head out to a weekend contest. And I did that in addition to also doing the summers there. But where I'm trying to take this story is that during the summers, there was a significant portion of graduate students that were from the state of Georgia that were coming up for the summer. And they just talked and talked and talked about all the great things that are happening in Georgia. And, if you're thinking about moving, maybe you should go ahead and look at that. And so I did. And it was, my seventh year of teaching at Chesterton. I was looking for a possible new road to be completely in charge of a program. And I had the unique opportunity to open up a brand new school in Cobb County, whose name happened to be Lassiter High School. We know what happened after my tenure there, which was only a year, which was prompted or created because of the fact that we, at that particular point in time, especially in the Midwest and most definitely in Northwest Indiana, were in a slump, a tremendous economic slump, and I couldn't sell my house. And so I was pretty much forced to have to leave Lassiter and turn it over to this gentleman by the name of Alfred Watkins, and return to the Chesterton area, but had received a job offer from Mr. James Gilworth, who was the president at Vandercook, whom I took classes from as a master's student, and I ended up at Vandercook.
What a small world, man.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a small world. Yeah. Well, you went back to Chesterton and you spent another 11 years there?
13.
13
Actually,
more.
13 years.
And then you decide to go west. What was that decision about?
It was based on, on a couple of things. Number one, it was based on the fact that my youngest was graduating, and she had her full ride to Indiana as a runner. My other two kids were either employed or just about. My son was just about to finish up his engineering degree at Purdue. I had been down there for spring breaks, and the reason I even ended up down there was because of my time at New Mexico State. I had never in my life been to the Southwest United States. But when I went ahead and moved to Las Cruces to take the job at New Mexico State from Vandercook, because I was in need of a marching band situation, and I wanted to direct a college marching band.
Right.
I just got attached. I fell in love with the Southwest, and so started making trips to Phoenix during spring break. And as the kids were at that point that it was okay, I can go ahead and maybe look at something else if I want to. The other reason, which is the real educational reason, is that the program, from my perspective, had kind of hit a dead end. And the dead end was in part due to the feeders and getting kids in, and I didn't. It was I was stymied by it because that particular individual was a very dear friend, and also was with Al for a number of years at Crown Point. So instead of raising a bunch of ruckus, I just decided, well, maybe it's time for me to look at something else. So I did, and I ended up being hired into the Deer Valley School District. Another story here at Barry Goldwater, the assistant principal who was doing the hiring, his name is Mike Anderson. Mike is from Michigan. He was at that point in time, he was the assistant principal, but he was one of the first band directors at Goldwater High School when it opened up, as a baritonist and a jazz piano player. And come to be known after the interview and so forth that Mike knew me. I didn't know Mike, but Mike knew me. And he knew me because of the fact, as I said, he was from Michigan, and he recognized the name Chesterton because of the Cherry Festival. And he saw the band in parades and competitions up there.
Wow.
And so what ended up happening is I went to Goldwater. At that particular time in my career, I had kind of developed this ability, through all the experience that I had gained in going in and fixing programs. The programs that I started when I went to Stevenson High School. Another example, I was the third band director in 2 years, and they just needed someone to come in and stabilize the program. When I went to Goldwater, I was the third band director in 2 years. They just needed someone to come in and steady the ship and bring some sense of continuity and a sense of just to make the kids feel better about what it was that they were doing and that their efforts were being, well spent.
And so then you went from Goldwater to Mountain Ridge, correct?
Yeah.
Was that a new school?
It was in the same district. It wasn't a brand new school, but it was. I was the second director there. The first one, Bruce DePlanty, opened up the school and moved on into administration. And so it was a neighbor school just on the other side of the mountain peaks that became open, and it had all of the ingredients that I was interested in being part of.
And you were there for 8 years, is that correct?
At
Mountain Ridge?
No, I was there for 12 years.
Oh, 12 years at Mountain Ridge.
12 years.
Well, you were obviously a great success there, because I was looking online, and hell, you even have a scholarship named after you there. Huh? That's pretty good, man. Not many directors can say that.
I guess. But the important thing about that, what the parents, that was part of the retirement thing. The parents were looking for something that would be meaningful. They could have bought me a set of golf clubs or something like that, but they went beyond that and said, hey, let's do something that will help other kids that are thinking about going into the music education field. And that's what the scholarship is for. That's
great. So what were some of the things while you were at Mountain Ridge that you personally did, that seemed to yield the biggest rewards?
Well, they're just, so many things. When I took took charge of control of the program, it was really very well established. I mean, there was some very strong roots that were there. Number one, it was concert-based centered. It had a good marching band, not an outstanding marching band, but a good marching band. It was a little iffish as far as the jazz program, simply because the director then was not a jazz musician. It had started work in the chamber chamber music area also. So all of those were foundational points that I felt, wow, this could really go somewhere. And one of the things I remember from my interview with the principal is she asked, well, what is it exactly that you would like to do with this program? And I had a very simple answer. I want to take this program to the next level. It was just that simple.
And you sure did.
Yeah, to a certain extent. There's still, another level beyond that. But the age thing kind of hampered that, a little bit and so forth. But we were able to do a number of just wonderful things in the concert area, in the marching area. The chamber music thing just took off like crazy. We had, as a regular basis, two full brass choirs, two full woodwind choirs, a clarinet choir, a saxophone orchestra, a flute choir, multiple percussion ensembles, and then beyond that, the smaller ensembles that the kids, would put together. So that was really neat to see that the jazz program started to flourish too.
That is great. So you taught in Arizona for 13 years?
Actually, a total of 15 years.
15 years. Okay. 15 years. So you come from the Midwest, you go to the Southwest. What differences were there from those days in Indiana as opposed to those days in Arizona? I mean, that had to be a whole different mindset, philosophy, purpose of, and not in terms of your personal one, but in terms of the music program in and of itself.
The singular biggest difference that I noticed when I got there was the marching activity. And as I described to people shortly after I arrived there, based on my involvement in the marching activity in the state of Indiana, and also as my involvement as an adjudicator, both at the state and the national level, for Bands of America and as part of the Central States Judges Association, and et cetera, et cetera. My general take on the marching activity when I arrived there was it was about a decade. It was about a decade behind the Midwest, what was considered normal in the Midwest, from the standpoint of show design, from the standpoint of auxiliary involvement, from the standpoint of just musicality, level of musicality. It has grown significantly, since that, but I saw that as one of the challenges that I could bring some of my experience to and help that grow. The concert band programs were solid, but just within a few locales, not the complete statewide, and the same with the jazz situation too. There were spots, little niches that had a strong jazz program, but not that many programs at that particular point in time that did the whole thing, like what we're used to in the Midwest.
Sure. You kind of alluded to this a little bit when you were talking about the age thing. After teaching for 40 years, and we know that students have changed in those last 40 years, but as we get older personally, we change also as teachers. I mean, our priorities shift. We have a lot of people that listen to the podcast, and a lot of them are younger teachers and a lot of them are older teachers. But as you look back at your career, what shifted for George? Where did the philosophy go from this vision to this vision? As you matured, what things did you kind of let go of, and what things did you kind of embrace?
One thing I never let go of was the expectation for quality, not only for myself as a teacher, but also for creating those situations for students, so that they had goals, achievable goals that they could continue to work towards. I think probably what happened with me as I continue to get older is that the trinkets in the profession did not matter as much as the what the students were able to achieve. I think that's the biggie.
Yeah. Our buddy, Steve Horniman. I mean, Steve Horniman.
Yeah.
He always said it best. He said, you get to a point where you go to contest. He said, you don't care if you get a 1, you just don't want to get a 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just changes the whole perspective of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, how about the kids? In the last 40 years, I mean, I think kids have changed. Do you think back, those summers that you were with Chesterton and the band, and they would do that summer tour where you had a contest every night for 2 weeks, and then it would culminate with the Bands of America thing in Whitewater, and then 2 weeks later you're on buses heading to Traverse City for the National Cherry Festival. I mean, do you think you would have enough kids in a program that you could do that today?
No. Was that answer fast enough for you?
That was, yeah. And what do you think it is? They just have so many things going on, or
precisely. And the kids that want to pursue that very seriously, especially in the summer, for the most part, we're going to leave the music camps out of it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the Blue Lake camps and the Interlockens and the Curry camp that we have here in Arizona. Those kids that want to attend those kinds of things are still going to do that. But as far as the marching activity goes, a couple of things have happened. One, it has dwindled, significantly, to the
in the summertime.
In the summertime.
Yeah.
For any number of reasons, but kids have an alternative nowadays to that has really sprung up very nicely, and those are drum corps. And so if they want to really seriously, you have that auxiliary member that wants to keep spinning and throwing things in the air and catching them. They have that, opportunity at another level that is wonderful for them. And if they're coached correctly by their high school director, they learn how to bring those skills and what they learn back to their own programs. So I think it's just it's an age out thing that has taken place, and kids are busier. They're doing other things. A number of them work, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's a good observation. Well, let's switch gears here a little bit. We're coming off the pandemic, COVID-19. The whole world's been upside down. But, with your history of teaching at the high school level, the college level, bands from coast to coast, I mean, what advice would you give directors as they're heading back to a more of a sense of normal in the fall?
Probably, I think that the number one thing, and I just finished a first week of a leadership camp and have another one coming up here on Thursday, and I'm in charge of helping to instruct the drum majors. The message that I'm trying to drive home to these kids is that right now the most important thing for all of us, the educators included, is it's about the family. The family is significantly more important than going out and getting this piece of plastic and wood and doing this and doing this. And then I go on to point out to them, as the directors, many directors well know, is that their challenge right now for so many of them is going to be the recruiting process, because kids they've left for any number of reasons, not through anyone's necessary fault, but they just left programs. And so right now, I think the most important thing is for the students is to create this really strong family synergy that other kids will be able to see and be encouraged to go ahead and move on. For the directors, especially the high school directors, it means you're going to have to get out of your high school office, and you're going to have to get down into those lower grade levels. You're going to have to make yourself present, and you're going to also help those lower grade level teachers in terms of this recruiting and retention process.
That's great advice. That is great advice. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that. The fact that we got to build back the culture, but the fact that we got to get down there and we got to get kids in the program. And,
right.
And those directors need to talk with their high school administrators about the importance of that too, because if not, they're going to be severely impacted in a few
exactly
years.
for a long time.
I
And
mean, yeah, go ahead.
Just to show you how influential what we do is. I don't know about you, but last night I was watching the Kennedy Center for the Arts, and I was just, man, I was so happy. I'm just so happy to listen to people perform and see people engaged in music and how it communicates with people. And I'm thinking, man, we've got to get this back. We've got to get this back into our schools, for our kids, for everyone, kids and parents and the community.
Anything you think that's been lost through all this that might take a long time to get back?
Not that I can really think of. The programs that have survived well have worked through this particular medium that you and I are going through. They have, if for no other reason, they've gotten into more of a one-to-one mode between teacher and student than the large ensemble, which has been good. The kids have had to practice a little bit more patience in the virtual realm. You're not going to be able to lean over and talk to your trumpet buddy and so forth. I mean, you can through chat, but you kind of have to keep an eye on that whole thing. But by and large, I think what everyone wants, what everyone is craving, is to get back to the norm.
Yeah, you think it's going to be soon that people will be traveling again with their bands? I mean, you had great experience with your band traveling. I mean, you did the Tournament of Roses parade, and even though it's local, you did the Fiesta Bowl, which is a really cool event, and you did the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and you marched to the presidential inaugural parade. I mean, so you've had experience bringing your kids all across the country. Coming off of COVID, you think directors are going to want to start traveling again with their bands?
Yes. And the reason for that will be twofold. One will be, as we know as directors, those are wonderful magnets for students. There are things for them to look forward to. They encourage kids who are looking at coming into the program. If they see that the ensemble or the band, choir, orchestra, doesn't matter, is doing some really neat things in terms of some traveling. I feel relatively confident that the travel industry has and will continue to take this whole pandemic thing very, very seriously, because like many of the other industries in our country and in the world, they've taken a major hit financially. And so this is not something you want to screw up so that you have to go through that downturn, because it could cost you, your job, or it could cost you your business.
Right.
So I think that they will be very careful in the way that things are organized, in the way that they run things. They will probably be a little more cautious relative to mask wearing and so forth, but that's fine.
You did a lot of traveling. I mentioned a bunch of the things that you did. And when you talk about that, that's such a commitment on the part of a program, a director. But we do that because we think that our students, or we feel that our students, believe our students gain from that. So from your perspective, what do students benefit from when they're preparing and experiencing something like the Tournament of Roses or a presidential inaugural or something like that?
You're still setting goals for them. The benchmark here is higher, in many cases significantly higher, because of its national attention. It is something that is completely different from the invitationals or the concert band festivals that you do year after year after year after year. Again, if you do them correctly, you don't do them year after year after year after year. You go ahead and space them out so that they create this wonderful thing for the kids to look forward to working for a little bit harder and also, having to work from a financial situation to make it happen.
If you had to do one of those again, you get to pick one. Which one would you do?
Well, I feel extremely blessed over the course of my career and everything that I was able to do. The ones, that they're all great, but the ones that I have the stories for that were really, really very neat were the two presidential inaugurations. The first one being for President Reagan, his first term, and the second one being for President Obama, his first term. The mere fact of being selected for that across the nation, because there is a reduced number, it's a small number of ensembles that they have for that, is tremendous. The exposure from the media that you get from that is tremendous. But the story that I have for at least my involvement in both of the inaugurations is really kind of, I don't know if it was planned this way by our boss upstairs or not, but with the Reagan inauguration, the story goes like this. We were close enough in Chesterton that we could drive. We could take motor coaches to DC for the inauguration. So again, Al being the master of organization, everything was arranged. We were a summer competing band, as you had pointed out. So our kids were used to going on gym floors with a sleeping bag in the summer, and that's where their nights were spent. He had located through some source this youth hostel in Washington that would provide the kids a very low cost thing. We would be able to go ahead and kids would take sleeping bags and so forth, and they just go hang out in a youth hostel, and we would be able to do all of what we wanted to do for fairly low cost. Al and I were at the Midwest, and we were one of the booths, and this gentleman, he was telling the gentleman about our upcoming trip to the inauguration, and the gentleman asked, well, where are you staying? Because he was involved in the travel industry and so forth. And Al told him where he was, and the guy's jaw dropped. He said, what? Where are you staying? Do you know anything about that area? And Al went, no. What can you tell me? Well, it happened to be the district where, how can I put it? It's a district that you don't want kids in because of nighttime activities that go on.
Was that guy Elmer Cook, that travel guy? Was that Elmer Cook?
It could have been. And so what ended up happening is, okay, so you're talking late December, you're talking almost less than a month before you have to travel to Washington. We're going like crazy. Well, the same guy helped us to go ahead and relocate to, of all places, the barracks of the Old Guard down in Virginia. Because at that, well, even nowadays, what happens is the military bases that are around DC, all the military personnel go up to DC. They're housed in DC for that time period, and so the base was empty, and we were able to go ahead and get into the base, and that was our place where we stayed. So we were still taking our sleeping bags and sleeping in military bunks and so forth. But the other part of the story, which is the one that is going to have a repeat with the Obama inauguration, was, if you remember historically, that inaugural process, the actual parade was put on momentary hold. Well, not momentary, it was hours. And it was because that was the time where President Carter was leaving office, and we had all of the Iran hostages, and it was being taken care of that day. And so I remember distinctly sitting in the mall with the United States Army band and the kids amongst them telling stories and so forth, waiting for the parade to start. We had to wait for the silly parade to start. All right. Fast forward to 2009 with the Obama inauguration. Wish the weather had been the same. It was just really cold. And of course, for us from Arizona, if it's 60 degrees, we're whining because it's cold outside. Well, we had the kids, with gloves. We had multiple layers. They had their uniforms on and so forth, and we're freezing, and we're waiting for the parade again, standing outside, hovering in masses to try to stay warm, because at the inauguration lunch, if you remember correctly, Senator Kennedy had a health episode in which they had to delay the parade once again for its start and so forth. So that was my story for that. But the biggest takeaway for the Obama inauguration was the fact that we raised, I'll just make it short and sweet. We were able to raise $340,000 in a little over a month, to the point that none of the kids or the staff or the parents had to pay anything. The community was just that gracious to go ahead and send in donations. Again, because of that particular inauguration, as I mentioned to the kids, regardless, and this was before the, we actually got into things seriously about it. I told them, if we're selected, you're going to be part of history either way, because you're either going to be part of history with the first Black American president in our country's history, or you're going to be part of history of the first Arizona president in history. So it was just a wonderful situation for us. And on top of that, with the travel that had to go on, all part of the story here, we were on 3 separate flights. We had to actually get a flight from Southwest. We had to get a plane. We had to book a plane just for ourselves. And the neat remembrance there is that one of our band parents was the pilot for that Southwest flight. So a lot of different memories besides the musical things that took place and so forth. But again, all of them, I have, if we had hours and hours, I could tell you a story about every single activity that we were in. But I'm very blessed and very thankful that I was able to be a part of that with our students.
That's great. That's great. I know, George, throughout your career, you've been really busy and active in a lot of state and national organizations. You're past president of Arizona. Is it Music Educators? I believe, correct?
Arizona Band and Orchestra Directors
Band and Orchestra.
Association.
Thank you.
Right.
And you were active in Indiana too. So when teachers are active in their state organizations, how do their students benefit?
Well, I think their students benefit because they are given meaningful information about what is happening with the process of music education as it relates to activities that the state organizations run. The reason that I got involved in the first place, I remember this distinctly, being at a high school down in the Indianapolis area, where the Indiana State School Music Association was having a meeting, a Saturday meeting, and we got into this marching band thing with them. And it occurred to me at that particular point in time that I had one of 2 options, and this is true for any music educator. You have one of 2 options that you can follow through when you're looking for change. You can either choose to stand away from it and complain about it all the time, or you can choose to move forward and be part of the change and help, with collective communication with other bodies and so forth. So that was when I realized, I need to stop standing on the sideline. I won't use the word I'm thinking of, but complaining about how things are going on, and get involved and try to help these things along. And at that particular point in time, I had expertise that I thought I would be able to bring the organization with my involvement with Bands of America as an adjudicator for Bands of America, and also as an active adjudicator for the Central States Judges Association. So that's when I jumped on board and I got involved at the local level relative to my district, and then I got involved in the state level with the Indiana State Music State School Music Association, got involved with that. And then I followed through when I came here to Arizona with the Band and Orchestra Director Association. And then because of that, I kind of got snookered into being part of NAFME at the national level too for a couple of years.
That's great. You missed the meeting is what you're saying.
Yeah.
you missed the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now that you're retired, George, what's the next chapter? I mean, you're still playing, teaching, judging, consulting. What's keeping you busy?
All of those things. I spent the first year after I retired, and nothing had popped up. Yeah, I was still doing some judging and playing, but I just felt like something was missing, and what was missing is teaching. I miss teaching. And I had an opportunity that was presented to me to get involved at the community college level to help music educators. And I thought, man, there's no better way, absolutely no better way to get back to the profession than do that. So, drawing upon my experience, wonderful experiences that I had at Vandercook, and even at, New Mexico State, helping the music ed kids, I said yes in a heartbeat. It's not like a normal teaching load by any stretch of the imagination, but I still have to prepare. I still get to be face-to-face, help kids to go ahead and move forward in their journey towards becoming music educators.
That's great, man. Well, keep going on, buddy. Keep doing it. You got any final thoughts or words of advice for our listeners?
For the educators, heads up and full steam ahead. We can, all of us can make this work. We can make it work for our students, and we really can return to normal. Just be patient.
George Hattendorf, thank you so much for taking time to join me for the podcast, and I hope I get a chance to see you soon so I can thank you in person, maybe at the Midwest this year.
Same. I hope that's the case myself.
Okay, amigo. God bless you.
Okay. Same to you. Take care, Charlie.
It's always great to catch up with friends and colleagues that we've been out of touch with. My conversation with George all came about because of a podcast I did with Jim Yarnell, Director of Music at the American School in The Hague. After listening to the podcast, George sent me the nicest message and said hearing Jim's conversation with me brought back some good old memories. And I can tell you, getting that message from George brought back some great memories for me as well, both as a young band director, watching the great Chesterton High School bands, and then later on when I was Vandercook College of Music band director and had the chance to work with the Chesterton band during George's tenure there. You know what I respect and admire about George is that he is a guy that gets involved. He was so active when he was in Indiana, and then when he went to Arizona, well, he set the bar even higher. And that's an important lesson for all of us, isn't it? That if we want to get the most out of our teaching positions, our teaching career, and if we want to give the most to our students, we need to get involved with professional organizations and activities, and we need to take advantage of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that we can provide our students. George, I'm sure your work will be talked about in the homes of your students for a long, long time. Bravo, my friend, for making such a difference in their lives. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. I really appreciate you being a part of today's conversation. And please do me a favor. Tell your friends and colleagues about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'll be back with more great conversations. So until the next time, this is Charlie Mangini saying, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.